Hi, I'm Jim Towey, founder of Aging with Dignity. Aging with Dignity considers artificial intelligence one of the most important subjects that must be discussed in America now. While we find ourselves with sideshows in Congress talking about impeachment and events at the Capitol, there's been an uninterrupted march of artificial intelligence innovations that are changing our lives, limiting our freedoms, and not allowing any discussion, any public discourse about whether we consent to these changes. Look at telemedicine and how far it's gone. Of course it has appeal to allow individuals to have remote interaction with physicians to cross rural areas and others and allow them to get treated. But what happens to the patient-physician relationship if they're looking at each other through a piece of glass, where there's no empathy, where there's no compassion, human touch, human concern? This is what technology leads to, an enslavement of individuals. I have with me Kathryn Clarke, head of Direction for Our Times, a woman of prayer who helps so many people all over the world discuss, cope with, and I would say surmount some of these modern challenges that deny our God-given dignity, our God-given awareness that we're made in the image and likeness of God. Kathy, when you and I were young, television came out. You started to see more and more electronics in our lives, adding machines, calculators, the typewriters that were manual that Mother Teresa used back, that you would return like that. Then you get electric typewriters, and you get this electric, and you can just go through the different, the cars, everything, manufacturing, science with medicine. It's all changing so much. What do you think about, are we head in the sand to sit there and go, come on, don't get in the way of progress? That's all been good, hasn't it?
I think when we were growing up, it went a lot more slowly. For example, the typewriter I learned on, boom, boom, you didn't even know you were doing this. But there was something satisfying about the feedback that it all gave you with your fine motor skills. But it went more slowly. Power steering was a good thing. We're not objecting to power steering. You remember the absence of it?
Right.
That was tough on women.
Yeah.
But
electric windows.
Yeah.
I call it a clicker, but of course it's a remote device, for the television. But which then led to the couch potato that had the clicker. It didn't even get up to change channels, and so you look at different conveniences and efficiencies that have grown through technological progress. Who can deny that? And of course, I get accused because of my concerns about artificial intelligence that I'm a head in the sand, anti-modernist who wants to go back to the old days. But what I want to go back to is a world where human beings had primacy. And it seems like now human beings are spectators in a world that's fast overrunning their ability to cope with all this technological and scientific change.
Well, when you go to a doctor and they don't make eye contact, they're looking at a computer screen and you're like, my left shoulder. Do you want to look at it? You might want to evaluate my range of motion.
Yeah.
They're just looking at a screen. It's not encouraging. And the other thing I would say is that the young people have these benefits that they're so used to. If you told them, okay, the electricity is going to go down or what have you, and you're going to have to walk home from Dublin.
Right.
They couldn't do it.
Right.
What's more, they couldn't stop and ask directions because nobody knows where.
Right.
Nobody knows. We're so dependent on. My husband, I make it a point to not use the maps. The old days, you went from town to town to town, and you had to stop. You had to ask directions. You met nice people in the doing of it. So I think that with this artificial intelligence, you're raising that up and you're decreasing the value of humanity, of the human being.
Right, and human intelligence. Because if people can't think for themselves, what happens? I think of COVID and what happened. The world seemed to get off its axis ever since then because it was at a time where you weren't allowed to think for yourself. Common sense didn't prevail. You saw silly things that were mandated, and now we realize that it wasn't a pandemic of the unvaccinated. It is vaccinated and unvaccinated a lot. Now the vaccines have limited effectiveness. And so you look at, I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I've been getting vaccinated my whole life. But when we look at what was disseminated, much of it was off of the internet, suppressing discussions on the internet, so technology was actually turned against us. There were filters placed. We now know what Twitter did. We now know what Facebook did. And we now know what Google did with their searches and how they rigged all this. YouTube was rigged. It was suppressing an honest discussion about public health that didn't hew the line of the administration, both Republican and Democratic administration. And I think that's why we look in America today and we recognize the ability to think for ourselves, to cope, to handle life is being encroached upon by artificial intelligence doing the work for us.
And here's the biggest symptom. A lot of the information that was promoted as definite has been proven wrong with regard to COVID, and yet nobody is corrected.
Right.
That's, for me, the most sinister symptom of the inability to think for themselves of people.
Right.
Because you say, but that was actually proven wrong. Oh, well, you got to get the vaccines for other people. But they've proven that they don't work in terms of,
Right.
Spread.
Right.
So it's actually not for someone else I'd be getting them. If it doesn't prevent
Right.
spread, I would be getting them for
Right.
myself. And should we not just say
Right.
that that's the truth? So that for me was the most sinister thing. With artificial intelligence, I keep waiting for them to come up with something to say, oh, here, press that button and you can do 30 minutes of prayer. The artificial intelligence will do 30 minutes of prayer. And I can barrel on through my life, but what's the problem with that? It won't impact me personally.
Right.
And this is the problem with artificial intelligence.
Right.
A student downloads a paper from the internet. What's happening? He's not learning to persevere, to bear the tension of an obligation that he has.
To grow. Right.
To grow, but to suffer.
Right. That's right.
To suffer for the growth.
Right.
We have to suffer for the growth so that one day he can bear the tension of negotiating us through nuclear war, maybe.
Yeah, right. And be able to cope and deal with stress. And and I think it was evident during this period where we were not allowed to think for ourselves. We had to comply and follow orders that were patently absurd. Some of the social distancing requirements that separated a woman from her husband as she's dying, and wasn't even allowed to be at the bedside and wasn't allowed to have a funeral. And now we realize all this stuff was not necessary. If you're going to turn the country into a country of germaphobes, then. But my point isn't about COVID. People can reasonably disagree, and good Lord knows we all had a reason to want to trust our public health authorities.
And we didn't want to get sick.
Yeah, and we didn't want to get sick, and we didn't want to get others sick.
Right.
But what's happened, I think, through artificial intelligence and that movement towards social distancing is it's pushed people toward their technology, toward their screens. And I've got 5 kids ages 20 to 30, and I've looked more and more how dependent they are on their smartphones to get through life, to interact with others. And I think something's lost there.
Have you had the experience where you're having a conversation and your child, you say, oh no, that was 36%. And 3 people in the room go, do-do-do. I said, are you checking my math? Are you actually checking my fact?
Yeah.
I said, that's something you do quietly, alone. Let's talk social.
Right.
Don't do that to anyone else.
Right.
Somebody was describing a situation where her famous father had been killed. He'd been assassinated. It's not a funny story, but this part is. And one of the young men in the room was like, wait, was he this? Yeah. And right away,
Right.
Now, she said, I've actually never talked about this before. And I mean, this was a moment.
Right.
And this young man was on his phone Googling, checking her facts.
I know. Yeah.
And I said to him later, okay, big mistake.
Yeah. Be present.
Meaning their social awareness is decreasing.
That's right. And their social capabilities are limited, and then they feel bad about themselves. That's why I think America needs a discussion about this. We don't want to talk about the damaging effects of social media on our young people, and yet we see skyrocketing anxiety, depression, despair, and it's slowly coming out, but high tech suppresses it. That's bad for business. Nobody should think for a second with artificial intelligence, these big tech companies really care about us and our abilities. They're there to make money. Let's be honest, that's what it's all about. They're making billionaires out there through the high-tech developments, but it's not about us. And I just feel like one of the things Aging with Dignity is going to try to do is stimulate a debate and a discussion in our country about artificial intelligence and whether we have some voice, some say, and how far it can go. On our next episode, we're going to talk about some of the concerns as it affects our elderly. So join us next week. Thank you.